AIPAC has been on a mission to destroy the candidacy of progressives across the country. And their massive investments in this project certainly paid off in Michigan's 11th district. After spending millions of dollars, Representative Haley Stevens, who AIPAC of course preferred, defeated fellow Democratic Representative Andy Levin, a Jewish progressive who has criticized Israel's illegal and brutal occupation of Palestinian territory. Stevens ultimately prevailed with 60% of the vote, a win that AIPAC celebrated as major and consequential. Now, AIPAC's intervention in this race was through one of their super PACs that's referred to as the United Democracy Project, which is a hilarious label considering what they're engaging in. And it's mostly funded by moderate Democrats? No, it's mostly funded by billionaire Republicans. So Stevens and Levin were forced into a primary contest by Michigan's redistricting process. And I know, Emma, there's some of that going on in New York, which I'd love you to jump in about in just a moment. But that provided an opportunity for AIPAC, Super PAC, and other special interest groups to pour literally millions of dollars into the race to oust Levin, who, by the way, has been described as one of the most progressive Jewish members of the House. Now, due to redistricting, Levin and Stevens both found themselves choosing between the 11th district and the neighboring 10th district, which unfortunately is a Trump-leaning seat based in Macomb County. Both ultimately chose the 11th district, leading to accusations of carpetbagging against Levin, whose current constituent base is largely within the 10th district. I'm gonna skip ahead because I think the statement from J Street is absolutely correct. So J Street is also a Jewish organization, but they are the antithesis of AIPAC. And here's what they had to say, quote, "It is alarming that this race, like many other Democratic primaries this cycle, was heavily impacted by the aggressive outside spending of AIPAC and its super PAC, the United Democracy Project. They spent nearly $5 million to target and defeat Levin, far more than was spent by any other group. AIPAC has endorsed and funded 109 Republicans who voted to overturn the 2020 election on January 6th. Promoters of the big lie like Jim Jordan, Scott Perry, and more, while attacking candidates like Andy Levin as extremists, which, by the way, also makes their label, their pro-democracy label ridiculous, considering the kinds of candidates they tend to fund and endorse." Emma, thoughts on this?
Yeah, it is a really troubling dynamic in the country right now where I think AIPAC and right-wing interests, and they overlap altogether, by the way, are really threatened by the Ilhan Omars, the Rashida Tlaibs, the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes, the Cori Bushes, the progressives in Congress who are causing a sea change about the way Israel and the Israeli apartheid state is discussed in the mainstream press. Because the more voices that you have in the halls of power talking about how 90% of the occupied territory in Palestine does not have clean water, how they are second-class citizens and have to check in with the Israeli government when they want to travel around the territory, how asymmetrical the warfare is there, where essentially Palestine is being occupied and they retaliate. But Israel's brutality, that's usually, it comes first, frankly, as a way to make sure that Palestine doesn't get too hopeful about their prospects for actually having some freedom. They will kill many times over because they have way more sophisticated weaponry, and Palestinians try to fight back, but because of the United States' unconditional support, that it's not gonna work out for them because we send them so much money and so much weaponry. And so it's an existential threat to right-wing hawks in Israel when there are more people in the halls of power saying, maybe we should make that conditional on, like, I don't know, treating Palestinians like human beings. And so the more people in Congress who have that perspective, the more scared AIPAC becomes. And so I think they understand, even though they are a right-wing organization, that they can get way more bang for their buck, and they can represent other right-wing interests who can funnel money through AIPAC, and it's under the guise of a pro-Israel lobby, not like the oil and gas industry or Wall Street, et cetera, right? And there's no accountability there. They can cut off progressives' legs in the primary process, and it's all under the guise of, hey, it's just AIPAC money. And so all of these issues intersect.
Yeah, you make a really great point there. The way dark money works in our congressional races and presidential races, by the way, is really, really important to hone in on, because, I think that things are changing, which is a good thing, where you can actually be openly critical about the government of Israel, just like any other government in any other country, without automatically being labeled anti-Semitic, right? And so I feel like a lot of these special interests kind of group together under that AIPAC label to do their spending in order to get the protection they think that they're gonna get, right? Because for the longest time, saying anything that came across as even a little anti-Israel was so negative. I mean, you would have a negative reaction to that. And it's changing among young voters and young people. I mean, they're definitely aware of what's going on, and being critical of the treatment of Palestinians by the Israeli government does not make you anti-Semitic at all. Same as being critical of the American government doesn't make you anti-American. That's insane. But I do think that the way dark money works in these congressional races is important to pay attention to. And in the end, the people who actually end up winning the most tend to be moderate Democrats in these races. And moderate Democrats in a lot of the policy issues that we care most about would much rather side with the Republican Party than with progressives, which is terrifying. And we see that play out with social spending bills and the like.
Well, I just wanna, you bring up America there. Imagine you were watching the United States' slow genocide and stealing of land of Native Americans in real time, and then understand why it's so important to speak out against what's happening in the West Bank and Gaza. And everybody but the United States and other allied countries in the West agrees with this assessment. The United Nations agrees with this assessment. Any country that isn't completely biased in this area agrees with this assessment. And so this is why we should support BDS, because the only way that South Africa really changed its position is when they were on apartheid, I should say, is when they were economically harmed. And I think you can see why AIPAC is so scared, is because people are starting to gain a consciousness about what is happening over there. And it's very analogous to what was happening in South Africa. And it's analogous to, as I say, other movements of cultural genocide throughout history. And we have to be clear about that and not be scared about being smeared as anti-Semitic, because frankly, like Andy Levin or Bernie Sanders, they'll also get smeared as being a self-hating Jew, because that's the only tactic that AIPAC can go back to. And all these other Jewish progressive organizations don't ever go there, because it's not true. It's a smear, it's false. And Jewish Americans in this country are some of the most progressive voters historically, and they've been incredibly consistent on that. And when you poll Jewish Americans, they are not supportive of the way that Israel is conducting this cultural genocide in Palestine. And so just remember that AIPAC is not representative of Jewish Americans.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. I really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.